This is Alec.
And this is Jack.
Welcome to another episode of Smith and Scholar. Smith and Scholar is a multimedia project dedicated to promoting and encouraging young men to pursue and live the good life. All right, so we are back, and today we are talking about something that's not too different from our last topic, which was love.
Or charity.
So if you haven't listened to that, we suggest that you go listen to that one because it is kind of fundamental in what we're talking about today, which is friendship.
Yeah, and like you said, we talked about charity in our last episode, and as we mentioned specifically in running through the different types of charity or different types of love, we mentioned philia, that mutual love shared between, that's often very relational, as all the loves are, but it's one that we see probably in our stronger relationships, whether that's family or friends. And as we discussed, and we wanted to hold off till now, there are different types of friendship that stem from philia, and this is an idea that came from Aristotle. And so it's something we wanted to talk about, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so we also wanted to talk about friendship because it's important. We've mentioned multiple times now that we are relational beings, so we have others around us. We tend to help others, and others tend to help us. So it's good to know the context in which that is occurring. And again, because we're relational beings, there's this necessity of relationship and what that relationship looks like, as we explored in love, how that love can manifest is different. With friendship, I think we'll dive into what those friendships look like. But I also want to point out we're making the assertion that we are relational beings. There's some contention surrounding this. I'll just say briefly, the contention is that we are more individualistic beings that don't necessarily rely on others, but we do tend to follow the philosophy of the social animal. So take that moving forward with how we're looking at this. So other people tend to think as man as maybe Homo economicus, where we're solely focused on cost and benefit analysis. And there's there's other views of man, but again, we're looking at social animal or political animal. It's also been described. So we communicate, we relate, and that's central to our being. So, also in terms of friendship, we're always going to be around other people for the most part, despite quarantines and whatnot that have occurred since March.
For a long time.
Yeah, and now going on for a long time. So, and then finally, because we're interacting with others, we should want the good of others, especially as we are pursuing the good life and trying to have the good for us. So, if we're really friends and pursuing the goodness, then we should want to share that goodness with others. So that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of friendship, our relationship with others, and now I guess we can go ahead and get into the different kinds of friendships.
Yes, we can. And so to start with, it's a type of friendship that seems almost kind of transactional. It's a little more than that, and this is a friendship based on utility. So it's one, like the word utility means, that it's one based on use. It's a friendship based on use. It's a friendship that's beneficial to both parties. Like I said, it's kind of transactional, right? You get something out of it. But, you can kind of think and go, friendship shouldn't be like that. That seems very, seems to miss the mark in a way. But actually, I don't often think that has to be a bad friendship. First of all, oftentimes we, in the world we live in, the relationships that we have with people, or, there are things that we want or desire that are good, and, you can't get those things on your own. So, you go to someone who can help you acquire that. And so, I mean, this can be anything as simple as, some like think about when you're a kid, right? You're on the playground and you want to be friends with so-and-so because they have, the cool new video game or some toy or something like that. And so your friendship starts off that way. And it's all about use, right? It's all about the ability to be able to use that game or to use that toy. And that sounds bad, but this is a good starting point for a lot of friendships, right? Like, again, I think it goes back to like being a kid. I think a lot of our friendships can start off this way, and that's not a bad thing because from there, that's how deeper friendships, like the roots of deeper friendships, are sown and can continue to grow.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because, again, using the word utility, it's a friendship of utility. You think, wow, am I just a tool that's being used? Is my only purpose for this one reason to be a friend? Well, and it might be, but again, as Jack mentioned, it might not necessarily be bad. And as we look at these other types of friendship, then you'll understand, okay, maybe a friendship does have to start off in this friendship of utility or one of the other ones before we can progress further and deeper in our friendship. One example I heard is if you are getting to know somebody that's local to your area, so that somebody that you'll be able to see pretty often and interact with regularly, then it makes sense to start out this friendship. Again, it's not necessarily that, this is a friendship of utility, but it just by nature, it kind of takes that way of, hey, you want to hang out and because I like to watch movies and we can watch movies together because I know you have a Netflix account. And so it gives a reason to hang out and meet up. But if you have some sort of friendship or interaction that maybe is more momentary, then you might go a little bit deeper. And so maybe I'm jumping forward a little bit, but for example, getting on a plane, and this is your one interaction with this person, you're not just going to start out by saying, hey, can I use your napkin or your whatever? You're going to go probably into the deeper details so you can become friends faster, per se. So anyways, that's just kind of my thought of, again, it's not necessarily bad. You can still have some good come out of utility.
Right.
Which brings me to the next level of friendship described, which is friendship of pleasure. And again, this can sound like, what? Now you're just using me for your sole gains of pleasure? Like, I'm only here to make you feel good? Well, again, because it's a relationship, there's reciprocity between the two friends. So that can't be completely ignored. In terms of friendship. Sorry for the little pause. I just want to make sure that the audio is still working. And because somebody is a little bit loud in the background, but maybe you guys won't hear that. So
he just wants to be on the show, Alec.
Yeah, he just wants to be on the show. So if you hear my son, yeah, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to get on here, but he's a little far.
He's got a lot of friends, I think.
He has a lot of friends, and I think those friends are mainly utility because they just want to play with him, or pleasure because he enjoys their presence and they enjoy his. Anyways, going back to pleasure, it's close to utility, but it's a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and I think you said this, and like same with utility. There's a sharing going on, which is a good thing, right? And this is sort of, again, like I think it's almost like these are levels, right? And I think that's kind of what we're getting at. These are levels of friendship, and this is sort of like the next stop. Like the closer you become with someone, it moves on from being a friendship out of utility, and it becomes you actually enjoy spending time with this person. You have similar interests, or you partake in similar activities. So like some of my good friends have always been people I played soccer with, and that's something we were able to bond over and grow closer. And you learn as you spend time with these people and your friends, you learn about them and their life and what makes them tick and what they enjoy, and it becomes a good for its own sake, right? Like just the spending time together. It almost seems to go beyond pleasure in a way, but it's not quite the next understanding of friendship that we're going to talk about. But it ends up becoming a good for its own sake, right? Which is, I think, the ideal understanding, or like that's like the ideal what you want in a friend, right? You enjoy each other's company for its own sake, not for anything you get out of it.
Yeah, and I think we can try and differentiate these two types of friendships a little bit better because if you're hearing, oh, you want to play soccer, well, that sounds kind of like a friendship of utility, because
Right.
you want to play soccer and that's why you're friends with me. So it's not just the act of getting something from somebody
Right.
else, but it is, as you mentioned, Jack, the shared pleasure between the two of you. That, and again, it's the sharing that's occurring during this friendship of pleasure. And again, the act of, well, not the act, but the experience of pleasure on both parties when there's something shared, interests, activities, something of those sorts. So again, it's a little bit deeper because we're not just getting something from somebody, but we're sharing a little bit more. And then the next, we'll say level of friendship is friendship of goodness. And so this, in the name, I think it can be pretty clear about what it is saying. It's about the goodness. It's about the good. And most importantly, it's about helping each other reach the good. Again, both parties helping each other to reach the good.
Yeah, and it at this point, the friendship becomes it's almost entirely other focused, right? You're not really concerned with yourself anymore. You're seeking the best for the other person, and you're no longer focusing on the utility or the pleasure that the friendship brings you. It's certainly just a desire to see the other person achieve the good. And I think this, we're getting at is this is the highest form of friendship, right? And you can it's seen pretty clearly by the title given to it.
Goodness.
Yeah, exactly. Goodness. And it is most helpful in pursuing the good life, right? Like, this is ideally, you want, and I mean, this isn't the case, but you probably want, we'll talk about, how many friends, and, in a minute. I think that's one of the questions we're going to discuss. But, you want a few friends who you can consider like friends of goodness, friends that are concerned with and committed to helping you live the good life and are concerned with what is the good for you. And I think that, I think ultimately, even though we don't recognize this, for the most part, I think, people who you consider your best friends, there's some innate understanding that the reason that you consider them your best friend is because you recognize that they want what is best for you. And so that's why they're your best friends.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. And I think also, as we look at this friendship of goodness, we described it as kind of you're focusing on the other. It's no longer just what can I get out of this friendship. And it bears a lot of resemblance to one of the loves that we talked about last time, which was agape. And that is, again, focused on self-giving. It's loving the other person unconditionally. And so while this doesn't necessarily get into that too much, because, again, the idea was that these friendships are based off of the understanding of philia, we can still see some elements, I would say, of agape and this understanding of how love works in that context, as well as how we are acting in this friendship as we would act in agape, or as we carry out agape love for somebody else. So now that we've talked about these three kinds of friendships, we actually didn't define what friendship is, which is what we usually do at the beginning of these little discussions, these podcasts. So this is not the definitive definition, and there might be better ones out there, but just kind of conglomerating what we discussed here, and then just some additional thought. We thought that friendship could be defined as promoting another's well-being by action with reciprocation and having acceptance of both parties, acknowledging that there's a relationship, and wishing the prolonged existence of the friendship, believing that the world is better with them. So that's a very long definition because it's multifaceted, and I think it does have to have these elements, and maybe there are more elements, maybe there's some here that could be redacted a little bit, but I think the important parts is two parties understanding that there's a relationship, acting and reciprocating, and then the third and final part is wishing for their goodness or wishing for their existence and that the world is better because of them.
And I mean, you're and by reciprocation, you don't mean like tit for tat, kind of like in the marketplace kind of idea. What you mean by reciprocation, particularly as it relates to a friendship of goodness, is that both parties recognize that this friendship is about helping the other pursue and live a good life. And I think for the most part, that's not something we obviously are actively thinking about when you have a close friendship like that. But again, it's sort of that innate understanding about, why are you close friends with this person? What, taking stock of what that friendship looks like and what its purpose is. And so that's certainly, I think, a good way, that definition that you've provided, Alec, is a good way of understanding and looking at friendship holistically.
Yeah, and it's definitely that part of reciprocation is necessary. So, because we're going to talk a little bit about what friendship is and isn't. So, since we have already talked about what it is, let's take some of those parts and describe what it isn't if you take one of those away. So, if we take away the reciprocation aspect, which by nature might take away the acknowledging their existence, as well as the wishing for their, wishing the best for them. Well, if you are a fan writing a letter to a famous sports player or athlete, that's the right terminology, you can't claim that they're your friend because they don't have the time or attention to give you to reciprocate the friendship. So there's no friendship that exists there.
Yeah, and it's almost similar. I think there's a lot of similarities between what the opposite of friendship is compared and similar to what we're saying the opposite of charity is, or what the opposite of love is. We were talking about last week, and you're just saying the absence of that reciprocity. So in essence, the opposite of friendship is not hate, like we were talking about. The opposite of love is not hate, but rather it's like a wishing that person did not exist. And so it's almost like this indifference or even an active willfulness that this person not be in your life, or a recognition that their presence in your life wouldn't make a difference. And so we recognize inherently in friendships that, when you claim that someone is a friend, they are a person that you would say makes a difference in your life.
Yeah, definitely. So again, the same relationship, love and indifference, wishing for their prolonged existence or wishing that they didn't exist at all. I think that's pretty clear to see, because you can't call somebody a friend if you don't want them around. And then one of the other facets of this is promoting their well-being, which I think kind of stems, if you don't want them around, then you don't want to promote their well-being. You don't want the best for them. And similarly, if you don't want the best for them, then what is their purpose in life? Or at least in your life, there would be no purpose because you don't really care about them. It's the same indifference, I think, that we can see throughout. So again, that's our definition, which is not the complete end-all, be-all definition, but just a conglomeration of thoughts in accordance with what we had set out in those three different types of friendship. So now that we've gone through the different kinds of friendships, as well as providing this kind of baseline definition of friendship, I think there are a few interesting things that we can talk about with regard to this. So we talked about the three friendships, and one thing I was thinking is, how did these friendships change? And that's kind of what I brought up with the whole airplane example. If somebody is going to be around you for a while, you might start at this, friendship of utility. And before we actually get to that, I just want to clear up, you probably shouldn't be thinking of your friendships with these labels to begin with, because it seems more transactional at this stage. Right. It's like, okay, well, I met this guy Jack, and I think we're going to start as a friendship of utility. Yeah,
no, definitely. Yeah, no, that would just be, that's bizarre, right? And even sometimes you don't even start off like, kind of have the, like we're talking about levels. Like sometimes you don't even start off with a friendship utility. Sometimes it's like immediately, like you just enjoy being around a person and you enjoy their company. You enjoy, having jam sessions, or you enjoy, hanging out and talking about politics, or you enjoy, doing whatever. And so, yeah, I definitely want, don't like think about this as like, I need to have good friends in my life. Well, I need to start Alec and Jack, so I need to start off like this. No. These are just ways of understanding what friendship looks like. And like we already said, like I said earlier, particularly when talking about friendship and goodness, like it's just natural, right? Like when you have your close friends, you're naturally inclined to want the best for them and you want the good for them. Now, obviously, that goes to like having a proper understanding of what the good is, and we hope that through our first couple episodes and talking about the virtues and what we will continue to talk about, we're trying to point out what the good is and what the good life looks like, and so you have a little bit of something to latch onto. But it's just natural.
Yeah, definitely. So then, as you are relating to this person, interacting with them, I think natural is the right word.
Mm-hmm.
You naturally progress through these different types of friendships because, it starts out as, hey, can I get a ride to practice? And then over time, you guys start talking. And then you realize you share a lot of common interests. So then you start hanging out outside of the ride, playing soccer or playing video games or something. And then again, during that prolonged time spent together, you start maybe talking about more intimate details of your life. And then you realize, this is a good guy. This is somebody I like. I enjoy spending my time with him. We also, do give and take. There's give and take in our relationship. But ultimately, I see this guy's worth, and I want him to experience some of the goodness that I've experienced in my life. And that's pretty natural in a friendship. If you like something, you usually share it with somebody else. And if you're trying to achieve one of the, I was going to say goodest things in life just because it's the good life, then you'd want to share this idea of living a virtuous life with them as well, which is, again, the friendship of goodness.
And, I think that like you said, these friendships change naturally. And I think in a way, what we've been talking about indicates that, I guess like the next question is, well, like how necessary are friends, right? Like, do we need friends, particularly when it comes to what we're talking about here? Can you live the good life without friends? And we brought this up at the very beginning when we started doing this podcast. And the resounding answer from the two of us, I believe, Alec, was you can, but it's really hard to. And the reason for that is, we've talked about a little bit. We're social creatures, we're social animals. We're relational. And I guess what particularly as it relates to the good life, a lot of stuff we've been talking about. One is friends are a good way to learn virtues, right? Like seeing their example, how they handle things, how they live out the cardinal virtues in their life and other virtues, and applying, what you see from them and going and doing it in your own life. And then also like they're good for accountability, right? Like, when you have, especially, when you have friends that are interested in helping you live the good life, they keep you accountable, right? They can tell you when you've overreacted, when you haven't been temperate, when you haven't been prudent, when you haven't acted justly towards others. And so that's a great benefit. And I think that for me, that's why having friends is maybe like that might be the most important reason why we have friends is in order for us to pursue and live the good life. Like man isn't made to be alone, and pursuing these things is good, and I think pursuing them with others is even better.
So Jack, do you want to give us a good example from media?
Yeah, actually, I love to, because I've been thinking about it like the whole time we've been doing this, and Alec brought it up last time, and yeah, now is the time where we're going to get into some Lord of the Rings references, and particularly, I think, everybody knows this. They've seen that. A lot of people have seen the movie and they know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's the relationship between Frodo and Sam, right? And actually, I didn't even really think about this before. I knew we were going to talk about this, but it just kind of came to mind. Is like the relationship between them it kind of actually goes through the levels or the types of friendship that we were talking about, right? So you see, Sam is Frodo's gardener, right? And that's like kind of how they meet. Obviously they grow up in Hobbiton together in the Shire, and they, they're around each other and that sort of thing. But, there's kind of like that. That's the start of the relationship in a way. Is Sam is Frodo's gardener and he cares for the garden, and that's how it's transactional way, and that's why they're friends. And then it grows into, them, that friendship of passion and like being enjoying each other's company. You see at the very beginning of the Fellowship, when I can't remember the name of the tavern that they like to frequent in the Shire, but you have Frodo and Sam and some of the, I think the gaffer's there, so that's Sam's dad, and they're just having a good time, enjoying each other's company. And then, I mean, you really see it in the end, like, well, Gandalf charges Sam with being there for Frodo, and Sam takes this very seriously, and it's his it ends up becoming a very much a friendship of goodness. It's a very much a friendship of the other desiring what is best and what is good for the other. And you see this most clearly, I think, at the very end of the trilogy, when they finally make it to the slopes of Mount Doom, and Frodo can't go on anymore. The burden of the ring is too much for him, and Sam knows that the burden of the ring isn't his to bear, but he realizes that what he's there for is to get Frodo to the end, and he says, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you, and he throws Frodo over his back, and probably one of the more emotional moments in the series, and carries him up the slopes of Mount Doom. And you just get again, that is I think the most perfect example in media. There are other examples, but this is just one that resounds, I think, with a lot of people, because you see this desire, this goodness. And I think tying it, we could tie it to all sorts of things we've talked about, particularly fortitude. How we talked about fortitude being a willingness to endure and to suffer for the good. And Sam recognizes that's what his part in this journey is. He's going to suffer for the good of Middle Earth, but also for Frodo, because in order for Middle Earth to be saved, Frodo has to make it. And you see that, and then just this understanding of, the good. I think, in Christianity, at least, and this is very much a theme that Christian themes are woven into the Lord of the Rings. But the Gospels say, greater love hath no man than this, but to lay down a life for a friend. And that's exactly like the kind of love that Sam is willing to show and act through with Frodo. And I just love that example, and I'm glad I think the catalyst to talking about friendship was thinking about that scene and wanting to look more into friendship. So yeah, I think that's great. I mean, do you have anything to add about that, Alec?
Just my same thought was the most powerful moment in the whole trilogy, whether you're reading the books or watching the movies, is definitely the very end. Well, it's technically not the very end, but the end of Frodo and Sam's journey is Sam helping his friend who's just gone through so much physically, mentally, emotionally, and being there for him. And while we might not have to suffer so many grievances as Frodo did, we should have friends or be that friend to those who do suffer a lot in this life, because there's a lot of suffering that goes on. And, that's something that we might talk about in the future, the presence of suffering in the world. But especially with regards to helping people during that time. And again, we can see that Frodo is especially struggling with such it's also a temptation. Mm-hmm. It's also a monumental task. So it's many things at once. And Sam is actually giving his all. So we can also see from that friendship that there's the love between them is also, a self-giving love, totally sacrificial, giving everything that they have. Sam specifically for Frodo in this moment. So I think that's especially powerful and something that, yes, we can look forward to or look into this example for that really good example of friendship and friendship of goodness.
Mm-hmm. And there's actually just one more thing that comes to mind thinking about the end of the Frodo Sam story. And in relation to wanting the good for the other, and it's like the very end, and I haven't read the books in a while, but I've watched the movies recently, and it's when, Bilbo is going to go off into the West, and they've offered Frodo a place as well, and he hasn't told Merry, Pippin, or Sam, and, Gandalf beckons Frodo to come onto the boat, and Sam is like, wait, what's going on? Why are you leaving? You can't leave. And he just kind of recognizes in that moment that, this part of the world is that Frodo, there's nothing left for Frodo in that part of the world, right? And even though, it might not be good in a way for Sam in that moment to he's losing a friend, right? He's physically losing his best friend, and he recognizes that the good for everyone, the good for their relationship is to let him go. And so I think that is another interesting dynamic and understanding of friendship that's portrayed in the friendship between those two.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's a really good summation of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings Sam and Frodo relationship, and
Yes.
it's not the end. You're going to hear more of this. So.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And not just them, but you'll hear more Lord of the Rings stuff going on in this podcast because great author, brilliant mind. So look forward to more references. So I think it's pretty clear. One thing that we wanted to talk about is, are these friendships any lesser or greater than others? And as the name suggests, utility, pleasure, goodness, one of these is not like the others.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can see that goodness would be the greatest friendship of them. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily mean that the other friendships are bad. It's just different levels or it's a different relationship that's going on between the two people. So, and as we talked about, the friendships can change over time, and it's good to start out as friends. It's good to be friends in general, because at the end of the day, ultimately the goal is looking for the good for the other person. So no matter where you start out, you're still in a friendship, which is good and which will hopefully lead to ultimate goodness for each other, attainment of the good life, pursuing the good life, and being virtuous along the way. So with that in mind, the other thing that we were thinking about is kind of the number of friends that you can have. So I think this is interesting because, well, nowadays especially, because everybody is busy, everybody's working, which we'll talk about next time. We'll talk about work next time. So everybody has all these things going on. And as we see, friendship requires a lot from one person. Well, it requires a lot from both people. So how many friends can you really have? Jack, I'll let you talk about some of your ponderings because I have a black horse.
Okay.
Dark horse.
A dark horse.
That's it.
Okay, interesting. Well, I think, there's maybe I have an interesting take on this. I think, first of all, I don't think there's you can't have a hard number on this, right? There's no way that you can say you can only have X amount of friends. That's just silly. But especially as you move towards, friendships of goodness, you really can only stretch, literally stretch yourself so far, right? You can only, you should want the good for everyone, right? And so you should aspire for all your friendships to be friendships of goodness. But the thing is I can't, it's hard to fathom. And now I'm thinking of something else. Now I have a different way of thinking this, but maybe it's not that your friendships are always friendships of goodness, right? For instance, one of my, best friends is away in Colorado, far, far away. And, even I'm constantly willing, in my mind that that his life is good and that he's pursuing the good and that I can, any way I can push him to live a good life. And, so that kind of requires, it's kind of, he's far away. So it's not like I'm constantly present and that sort of thing. And it's different. I guess my point is these things can manifest differently. So there's not an easy answer. But I think that if maybe the question is not necessarily how many friends you can have, but just having an absolute willingness to, have friendships of goodness that in order to, to me, it's very similar to agape, right? I think every person should be willing to, or everyone should want to be willing to be able to say that in a moment they would be able to sacrifice whatever it is, to be able to self-empty themselves and to be totally selfless towards another person, right? And I think friendships are the same way, right? I think we want to be able to have, we should desire to have these relationships with others where we would say that at all times and under all circumstances, we always will the good for the other.
All right, so that's actually pretty similar to what I was thinking.
Sorry to steal your thunder.
No, that's totally fine. Because I do think I might use a little bit different language to be a little more emphatic in what I want to say, because you said we should all want to have a willingness to have friendships of goodness. I think we should actively pursue friendships of goodness with everybody. And I think that's the point you were getting at.
Yeah.
I just want to be more emphatic in that how many friends can you have? You can have, n approaches infinity friends. you just can't have infinite number of friends because it's not possible. So
in another dimension.
In another dimension, in the fifth dimension. So you can have n approaches infinity friends, but each of those friendships should be active. You should actively pursue the highest form of friendship. And I think it makes sense because if you're looking at it in the lens of natural law, that things have a purpose and that there's a telos, or there's a defined goal set for everything, then the designed goal should be perfection of whatever you're pursuing, whether it's this life and the good life, or if it's a friendship. Well, if we have come to this conclusion, and maybe you guys come to a different conclusion, but if we come to the conclusion that the friendship of goodness is the highest form of friendship, or something similar, then all our friendships should aspire to be that kind of friendship. So that's why I posit that we should actively pursue the friendship of goodness with everybody, which, as Jack mentioned, is the active pursuit of self-sacrifice for everybody that we are friends with. And so I think we agree on that. Do you want to add anything else?
No, I think I appreciate the emphasis, because I totally agree that it's wanting to actively, pursue these friendships, and when you have friendships, to make them friendships of goodness by actively desiring and choosing to will the good and desire the good for the other person. And I mean, this is why friendship is so tied to love. And even though it's interesting, I think that, we base this, we talked about friendship today based on, diverging from philia. But what we're really getting at is that, friendship is super tied to agape, right? Like that's the whole drive. And maybe, I guess you can just say relationally, any relationship you have, whether it's, with your mailman or your brother. And the thing is that what is good in that relationship and the good that you desire is different. You want the mailman to be able to do a good job in delivering your mail, and you want to have a cordial relationship with him. And that is like the extent of the good, in that relationship. And you should want that to happen by, in my case, not parking my truck in front of my mailbox at my house so that he can't deliver mail and do his job. Or, if you have a brother or sibling, the good is different. So I guess, I guess what we're trying to get at is there's a lot linked there. And so that's just all the rest I had to say.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you make, because a part of this is how many friends can you have and approaches infinity, but that doesn't mean everybody has to be your friend. The mailman doesn't have to be your friend, because, again, it does require reciprocation on both parts. Well, what we posit. So even if you want the good for another, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are your friend. And similarly, if you are trying to pursue this friendship of goodness with everybody, maybe you don't necessarily have the friendship of goodness with everybody because another person doesn't have the same desire of goodness or self-sacrifice for you. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, most people are probably not, well, I don't want to make any assumptions here, but it's hard to be self-sacrificial to a majority of people.
Right.
So it's the active pursuit of that ideal, which is important. Then going back to the idea that not everybody has to be your friend, I think that's a very important distinction to make, of which you touched upon, Jack, especially with the mailman, is if you are actively pursuing friendship with everybody that you meet, then I think there comes a point where maybe it's much, much harder to be friends with many people, because if you're, again, just starting out to make friends, a logistical nightmare will occur with how you spend your time.
Right.
And then your true friends might say, hey, man, why are you spending time with 77 other people throughout this week? And you say, well, I got to meet another 124 next week. So there's a logistical problem with that. Spreading yourself too thin, as Jack put it. And then also just going back to the reciprocation. Not everybody is going to gel with you. You're not going to get along with everybody. And I think that's an important thing to take note of. I think most people would understand this, and I don't want to get too, political or I don't know if that's the right word, but you can't always be friends with everybody, because if you have differing views or opinions that are unreconcilable, then they won't be your friend.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they'll be your enemy, which is not the same thing as the opposite of friendship. So, and I think that's good to have conflict in some degree, even with friends. And I think you can still have friendships with people whose ideals conflict with yours.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to put that out there. Not everybody has to be your friend. You do have to make important decisions on which friendships you spend more time with.
Prudence.
And how you can, yes, prudence for sure. and then also just recognizing that not everybody can be your friends at times because of personal differences and, again, geographical distances, although it's much lesser nowadays with the advent of the internet. So do you want to add anything else to that?
No, I think, I mean, I don't have anything else to add. I mean, I think that sums up everything that I was going to say. So,
yeah. So we're running a little bit over what we normally talk about because this is such a cool topic. So should we stop here?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, because one thing I wanted to talk about was, I think we're going to talk about it later. Community, sense of community. So, just a little bit teaser. We're going to talk about this in 3 or 4 weeks, and so this idea that because we are on, we're actually going to talk about 2 facets later: locality and community. Or I can't remember how we set it up, but we're going to talk about that in some respect. Because one thing I was thinking about as soon as I mentioned it was internet as a way to overcome. I was going to say transgress, but it's not negative. You overcome geographical boundaries. So that's one thing to look forward to. And any other related topics that we're going to be covering soon on friendship or relationships?
I don't think so. I mean, we're going to talk about leisure, and I think friendships are work, but not in this context of which we're going to talk about next week. But you have to it's a little different than leisure. But I think friendship, there's a place for leisure within friendship. So maybe we'll touch upon that a little bit when we talk about leisure. Yeah,
we're going to talk about brotherhood.
That's it. Yeah, brotherhood.
Sonhood.
Yeah, being a good son.
Yeah, being a good son. So just other relational things, which I think we'll be able to touch on some good points on them. So then let's go ahead and stop here because this is our longest to date. But if you made it this far, thank you.
Yes, thank you for listening.
All right, so hopefully you guys have stuff to think about, and you can catch us next time.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Smith and Scholar. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast on all the major platforms, including YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. Also, follow us on Twitter to stay up to date with everything we are doing and thinking.
Finally, feel free to give us feedback and ask questions across the different platforms. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, this is Smith and Scholar.